I was on the Heathrow Express into London. Grey drizzle on the window, that faint hot dust smell from the brakes. Across the aisle, a big Midwestern dad in a fresh NFL hoodie was sweating over the world clock on his phone, glasses down his nose, socks and sandals on full display. He stared at GMT, then at New York time, then at the cloudy fields going by, and finally came out with, "So when does Europe switch back to American time? Or is this like permanent?" The British guy next to him tried to explain time zones, the prime meridian, all of it. At my age, you learn to let the universe handle that kind of paperwork. In a cramped alley trattoria in Rome, you could smell tomatoes and exhaust fighting for air, plates clinking under a string of tired little lights. At the corner table, a Florida wine mom in a floppy straw hat was pushing spaghetti around and filming everything with her phone held vertical, bracelets jangling every time she moved. When the waiter brought out cacio e pepe, she leaned back in her chair and hit him with, "Can you make this into like an authentic Italian Alfredo, but not so old-fashioned?" He blinked a couple times, said something gentle in Italian, and brought her extra cheese anyway. The ruins aren't just in the Forum, some of them are still talking. On a Paris cafe terrace near the Seine, the cold metal chair was colder than the wind, and the tiny coffees came in cups that looked like they belonged to dolls. At the next table, a recently retired engineer type had a money belt, a neck pouch, and a spreadsheet printed out with exchange rates highlighted. He laid a crisp $20 bill on the saucer like he was detonating something and announced to the bewildered waiter, "Just count this as 20 euros. It's basically the same thing and the dollar is stronger anyway." The waiter calmly pointed at the menu, the check, the euro symbol, and then at the bill like it was a wildlife exhibit. Nothing ages a man faster than watching his favorite currency get ignored. In Berlin, outside the Brandenburg Gate, the sky was that washed-out white that makes everything look like an old photograph. A college bro backpacker in a backwards cap had a lonely planet sticking out of his bag and a German flag bandana he'd clearly bought that morning. He stared up at the bilingual plaque for a full minute, lips moving as he tried to sound things out, then turned to his friend and declared, "So, is Berlin German like their slang version, and normal German is what they speak in Austria?" A local guide nearby gave a very patient explanation about standard German, dialects, borders, the usual. You could see his soul leave his body somewhere around the word standard. Out on a black sand beach in Iceland, the wind felt like it had been personally sharpened, and the sea spray carried bits of ice that stung when they hit your face. A fitness influencer guy in compression leggings and a tank top was pacing around, flexing for his tripod, trying to find the good light in a country that mostly operates on survival light. He looked up at the low, gray noon and the chunky lava rocks and finally blurted, "Did they forget to turn on summer here? Or is this like a Viking aesthetic thing?" The guide explained the Gulf Stream, latitude, and why the sun barely bothers to show up. Some muscles never get trained, no matter how many reps you do. On a Swiss intercity train gliding past perfect green pastures and neat little villages, the air inside was quiet enough that you could hear pages turning. A corporate sales guy in a too-tight blazer had his laptop open, PowerPoint glowing, Bluetooth headset still in like he was allergic to silence. After the conductor reminded him twice to keep it down, he rolled his eyes and said, a little too loud for that car, "You all need to relax. In America, we take calls on trains because we value productivity over pretending to be a library." People shifted in their seats, but no one said anything. The conductor just smiled and moved on. Nothing says productivity like being the only noise in a country that runs on clocks. Under the Acropolis in Athens, dust on your shoes turns into a permanent part of you, and the sun bounces off the marble like it's got a grudge. A golf trip group leader in a polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses was herding his buddies through the ruins. clipboard in hand like he was running a sales conference. He stopped at a crumbling column, reached out and tapped it with his knuckle before coming out with, "Back home we'd have torn this down and put in a proper visitor center with aircon by now. Why are they still keeping all this broken stuff?" The guide's smile didn't move, but his eyes aged 10 years. Some people look at 3,000 years of history and see a missed construction opportunity. In Dublin, a thin mist hung over Temple Bar, and you could smell stale beer and fryer oil underneath all the live music bleeding out of doorways. A small-town pastor on a See the Real Ireland trip stood in the middle of it all, clutching a guidebook with the movie stills still visible on the cover. He watched a stag party stumble by in matching green wigs, glanced up at a pub sign he recognized from a film, and announced to his group, "So this is the exact bar where they shot that prayer scene in that one Irish movie, right? They just keep it like this every night?" The local bartender told him kindly that movies bring their own reality. The funny part is how many people try to live in the DVD extras. In Barcelona, late afternoon heat bounced off the stone in the Gothic quarter, and you could smell grilled seafood sneaking out from tiny kitchens. A prepper uncle type in a tactical vest, lots of empty pockets, no actual gear, stood in front of a closed shop with a metal shutter pulled down for siesta. He checked his watch, checked the open hours sign, then announced to no one in particular, if they just stayed open 9 to 5 like normal businesses, they'd double their revenue and fix their whole economy. A local woman walking her dog gave him a quick primer on siesta, heat, family time, and somehow still made it sound polite. There's a special kind of arrogance that thinks a spreadsheet can outvote the sun. On the Istanbul side, that still counts as Europe, near Hagia Sophia, the air smelled like roasting chestnuts and exhaust, and the call to prayer floated over the traffic. A cruise ship grandma in a bright floral blouse was staring up at the mosaics, clutching a ship-branded tote bag like it was a life preserver. She turned to the guide, frowned at the layered history he'd just described, church, mosque, museum, mosque again, and finally said, "Why don't they just pick one thing and make it a proper church like we have? This back and forth can't be good for tourism." The guide nodded slowly and tried to summarize 15 centuries of empire in 3 sentences. Some buildings are complicated because people are complicated. The brochures just leave that part out. In Amsterdam, bikes hissed past on wet cobblestones and the canal water smelled faintly of metal and rain. A tech startup bro in a minimalist windbreaker stood on a narrow bridge, AirPods in, clutching an oat latte in a cup that cost more than his haircut. He watched a wave of cyclists glide through the junction, and then the light changed, no honking, no yelling, and came out with, "If they let cars be the default like in a real city, their whole traffic efficiency would triple." A Dutch guy next to him pointed at the bike lane, the tram line, and the very calm intersection and didn't bother arguing. Sometimes the data is right in front of you. It's the user that's still in beta. Outside Melbourne, at a wildlife sanctuary that smelled like eucalyptus and damp dirt, the gum trees clicked softly in the breeze, and distant traffic sounded half fake. A quiet accountant-type husband in a wide-brimmed hat was standing by a fenced paddock, looking mildly disappointed at some sleepy kangaroos lying around like retired boxers. After a minute, he turned to the ranger and dropped, "So when do they come out and hop around the streets like on TV? Or is that just on special days?" The ranger explained suburbs, roads, and how wild animals generally prefer not being hit by SUVs. The man nodded like someone who's just learned his favorite TV character is only in 3 episodes. Up in northern Norway in July, the air felt like a refrigerator that forgot to close its door, and the sky refused to commit tonight. I was on a little harbor bench, watching boats that never turned their lights fully on because it never got fully dark. Next to me, the same sunburned Midwestern dad from an earlier flight, baseball cap now slightly crooked, checked his watch for the third time, and finally said, "So when exactly does God turn the lights off here? Or do you people just ignore bedtime all summer?" The local fisherman beside him gave a simple explanation about the Arctic Circle and the midnight sun. I'll be honest, the jet lag isn't half as bad as the theology. In Vienna, in a quiet coffee house where the teaspoons barely clink and the cakes look like they have a dress code, a Florida wine mom, different hat this time, was digging in her purse like it was a crime scene. The waiter set down her Sacher-Torte and melange with the kind of precision you usually reserve for surgery. She waved a shiny card in the air and said, "You seriously don't have tap to pay in a place this fancy. How is Europe not up to American standards yet?" The waiter simply pointed to the small sign. "Cash preferred," explained the bank fees, and mentioned that they'd been doing fine since 1876. For a civilization that survived empires, a missing payment terminal is not the emergency she thinks it is. On a dusty Australian highway somewhere between small town and nothing left, the heat shimmered above the tarmac and bugs suicided against the windshield in slow motion. I was riding shotgun in a tour van, watching the red earth slide by, when a recently retired engineer in a mesh cap leaned forward from the back row. He'd been quiet the whole time, fiddling with his GPS that kept insisting we were in the ocean. Finally, as a road train thundered past on the right, he said, "If they just drove on the correct side and made the road straight, this whole outback thing would be way more efficient." The driver adjusted his grip on the wheel, nodded once, and kept his eyes on the endless bend. At a certain point, you stop arguing and just let the landscape do the explaining.